Warm welcome to everyone in this room and also to the panelists here with me on stage. My name is Charlotte Keizer. I'm with IDH and I have the pleasure to moderate today's discussion on data collaboration. In fact, data collaboration is something we're very passionate about at IDH. We are here with many of us in this conference, so whenever you'll run into someone working at IDH, I'm sure they'll drop the name or the word data in maybe their second sentence already. And if you've just joined the plenary session, you would have also heard my colleague Caroline Gommans talk about the FarmFit Insights Hub that we launched with IDH. And we could not have launched this Insight Hub without data. Data on smallholder farmers, data from agribusinesses, and we couldn't have done it without collaboration. So it's really important for us to work on collaboration so that we can get to inclusive business models to help transform agricultural markets and transform food systems. So today's discussion, I hope that we can inspire you some more on the experiences from our panelists up here, on their incentives to collaborate.
Kenya has been collecting farmer data for the last 3 to 4 months. This is a second exercise. There was an initial exercise that was done in January. That had its own challenges. The current exercise has taken 3 to 4 months, and now we officially say through the Ministry of Agriculture, we have 6 million data profiles collected. All these data sets are at KALRO. What we are talking about is farmer, name, ID number, everything that comes with data privacy. KALRO can now share that data through a data sharing protocol that has been created for them, open source, goodwill, through Digital Green, plugged in at KALRO. We call it FarmStack in Ethiopia, we call it FarmStack in India. In Kenya, it's called KDP. Through the right protocols, please note, I'm saying right protocols, KALRO can be able to share that data with you. They are confirming that now. He says there's a web page, it was in his slides. Please reach out to KALRO and ask for that data. That is what Digital Green is doing with KALRO. What is data sharing? Which business are you in? What exactly are you looking for? Which type of data sets are you looking for? You need to ask KALRO to give you that particular data set so that you can improve on your business. It has to meet some of the criteria that Shujita talked about. What type of data are you exactly asking for? Is it just who are the coffee farmers in Kiambu, as an example, right? Are there coffee farmers in Kiambu? You need to be very aware of what you're asking for. And then through the platform, KALRO can be able to tell you, yes, we have these data sets, because you will pick what you want. KALRO is the steward in all this, and then they transfer it back to you. But there's an MOU that you need to sign that once you get that data, you're going to use it for the right thing.
Wonderful. And can I just follow up on that a little bit, using it for the right thing? What are the incentives for you to really share this data? Why are we looking for it?
Because farmer data collection is expensive. Anyone will tell you from the word go, it is costly. So if already somebody has done the collection and it is clean data, you don't need to go through that. The incentive is you're going to cut your cost by more than 60%.
Thank you, Beryl. Now looking at Francis, can you also share some examples of data collaboration for inclusive finance? We've already heard a few this morning. Can you really zoom in on what you see as the most important incentives to share data?
Thank you. And I work in finance, so I'll speak on 2 use cases in finance. So the first is on digital lending. And in the early days of digital lending, before we had any form of regulation by the central bank, there was a bit of concerns around certain lenders who were pushing the envelope of what was deemed as acceptable lending practices. And 12 of these lenders came together to form an association. And one of the issues that they were trying to address was on multiple defaults and borrowing. And this was the days, excuse me, before digital lenders, non-bank digital lenders were allowed to participate in the credit information sharing mechanism. So they came together and formed some bit of data exchange that among themselves they could now see who were taking a loan, from any other provider, to sort of address some of the issues that the gentleman from Equity Bank raised. That initiative, I think, started in 2019 and was supported by the World Bank. And then my second use case is in the insurance field. So one of the issues and concerns in the motor vehicle and even on medical insurance is the issue of fraud. And this mostly relates to multiple claims against the same loss. So the industry association also came together to develop some form of data exchange, if I could call it a data clearinghouse, that insurers could then sort of consult before paying off claims, just as a mechanism to prevent fraud that relates to multiple claims against the same loss. But that same data infrastructure is also linked to the police data set and even the motor vehicle registration data set, that's for motor vehicle insurance. So it not only helps in reducing the incidence of insurance fraud, but also helps in faster claim settlement. And given that insurers can see claim history, it also helps in lowering premiums for people who have not sort of had claims in the past that will then sort of have them perceived as higher risk. So I want to highlight those two use cases.
Thank you for sharing those. I'd like to turn to Albert Bogaert. Could you also provide us with an example of data collaboration that you see happening in the private sector and some of the incentives that you see, maybe the incentives that you haven't already heard today, to put you on the spot?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. And I will give a couple of more examples. Is that okay?
That's all right.
Yeah, you can hear me now. Yeah. I'll refer to the last slide of Srijit, his excellent presentation. That was one of the most complete ones I've ever seen on data sharing. You identified a couple of challenges, the systems, the governance, and a couple of others. I'll start with an initiative that Rabobank has been one of the founders of. That's called Join Data, and that's based in the Netherlands. The incentive of that is basically optimizing the production of the farm. So it connects the data of feed mills with off-takers, because feed and milk production are closely related. The producers of equipment like milking robots are all connected. So clear incentive, not access to finance, because they're all financed, most of them by Rabobank. So clear incentive, the technology is not a problem. But what is then the next challenge? If you have technology, if you have incentives, if you have data correct, so those are 3-4 hurdles that you have to cover in most areas where we are working here. The next issue then is trust and governance. You mentioned that in your slide. And if you're interested how that works in Join Data, I would encourage you to refer to the website. It's called join-data.nl. There you can find farmer profiles, or farmer, let's say, stories, and you see also the governance structure, which is structured as a cooperative, with an annual general meeting, with the supervisory board, with all the participants being represented. And that works very well. And it was the only way to solve it. A not-for-profit entity structured as a cooperative. And I think we have to keep that in mind if we continue this exploration and conversation. You can't copy Join Data, but you can copy that separate piece. If you talk about technology, we have an initiative we call Data Keeper, and it's a very simple solution. It's an individual who has a smartphone and has 2 columns. One is the type of data that you have, and the other one is the parties that you share it with. You can also find it on the internet, datakeeper.nl, if you want more information on that. The incentive is the ease of use. It's convenience. You don't have to carry your passport. You just use that data sharing tool. So it connects databases of banks, of governments with potential vendors or whatever. So that's about technology and systems. If you talk about standardization and collection methods, we have been involved in a very new initiative. It's just 2 weeks old, published It's called Tracked. And you can also refer to that on the website, because I only have 3 minutes, Charlotte. So, what is the incentive behind Tracked? You can imagine agribusinesses. They all have the same off-takers, buyers, big companies in the Netherlands, who increasingly face regulation and certification pressure, the EUDR regulations. So imagine you're a company, you have 5 different off-takers who have 5 different sustainability standards. What a work that is. And then all companies face the same problem. And those companies are never going to, or at least I don't think it's likely they will share data. But there is a big competitive or pre-competitive interest in standardization of that. So this is all about standardization to start with. And data sharing happens through the supply chain, but yeah, it's owned by companies and with clear incentives. So I think that's a very inspiring example as well on how you can structure that. Apart from that, we have 2 initiatives that we don't call data sharing initiatives. It's Acorn, where my colleague Margreet is presenting as we speak in the other session. And it's our venture team of Rabo Partnerships. We collaborate with Rabo Partnerships with parties like MasterCard and IDH from an ecosystem approach to digitize the transactions between farmers and their farmer cooperatives. That is all from the incentive to have access to finance. And yeah, why does IDH, for instance, also cooperate with that? You're funding the last mile activities and the training, and that is because there is a joint interest of a business case for banks and Rabobank and local banks, on one hand, but also empowering farmer-producer organizations and cooperatives, because there the ultimate data ownership of the farmer-producer data is with the farmers and their organizations. And then when it's allowed to share with banks, they can build with the products of Rabobank, like remote sensing, that's what we are adding. So it's not a data sharing initiative, but a lot of data is shared. And likewise in Acorn, farmers share polygons, very accurate polygons with Rabobank. We basically do remote sensing measurement of carbon sequestration, certify that and sell it in the international carbon market. So in the end, also a very clear incentive, 30-35 euro per carbon removal unit, per ton of CO2, which 80% goes to the farmer. So a lot of incentives there, and yeah, not a data sharing initiative, but it could well be the start of additional data sharing, because if Acorn and if a farmer shares his polygon, detailed polygon verified with Acorn, that's of course also very interesting for banks, talking about data quality and things like that. So I hope that fitted in the 3 minutes, but I'm afraid
you did perfectly fine.
You'll skip me for the next question.
No, we're well on time. Thank you so much for sharing those examples, very inspiring. And I'd like to continue with where you left off, because we've heard this morning a lot about the incentives to collaborate for development organizations, banks, off-takers, and you just mentioned toward the end, Albert, the incentives also for farmer producers and their organizations. So I'd like to zoom in a little bit more on what farmers can gain from collaborations in data. Looking at you, Zila, if you could share a little bit more with the work you do with Easy Agric, as you interact closely with farmers, what data would you be able to share? And if you are sharing data, how would it benefit farmers?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm going to use the example of I was going to go natural. So I'm going to use an example of the project we are currently doing with Equity Bank, financed by Agrifin, to elaborate the incentives, that some of the blockers and the realities when it comes to business side of data sharing. It's easy to collect, protect, share data when you're talking about impact, because the cost is kind of embedded within, let me say, a grant or something. But it's different when it's private sector, where it has to be sustainable for both parties collaborating. So Easy Agric is an agtech company. We work with farmers and agribusinesses in Uganda. Today, we have close to 400,000 farmers registered, accessing inputs, financing, and information plus produce markets. Now, at every point that the farmer interacts with the platform, they're sharing data voluntarily. For you to be able to access inputs, we need to know where you're located for it to be delivered. That means we need some sort of bio. We need to know your transaction. For you to be, we don't ask for it. Secondly, for you to be able to sell to the off-taker needs to know your production capacity, so that there's consistency in supply on their side. You're voluntarily providing that data on their platform. For you to be able to access farming, well-curated farming content that is specific for your farm, you'll have to tell the system what crop you're doing, where you're doing it from, what stage of the season you're in. Lastly, for you to be able to access financing from our partner like Equity Bank, the Equity Bank would like to know beyond your production, needs to know also your bio, your national ID, yeah, some photos. That means at every point you're interacting with that system, you're voluntarily providing the data. Now, why are they willing to do that? It comes down to the value. It comes down to the value that the farmers are going to get. It comes down to the cost. Does it, for a farmer today, especially a smallholder farmer, it's mainly the cost. They are very, very price sensitive. Even with 0.05 cents of a dollar, if there's that difference in a service that they're going to get, they'd rather go with that service that is that cheap to that by that margin than go with a service more expensive by that small margin. Giving an example of Equity. When we were approached by Equity, as a platform we have close to 400,000 farmers registered, and on a monthly basis we have those who are interacting either directly or through their intermediaries, the agents. We have close to 20,000 on a monthly basis, reading content, accessing inputs. So that was incentive enough for us to start collaborating with Equity. And the value was to help all these farmers access inputs. How do they do that? They provide the financing for the inputs. So the excitement was high. We had the numbers of farmers. The next thing is, okay, in an ideal situation where there was no data governance, no privacy policy, we'd have a call like, okay, Easy Agric, this is Equity. Can you share with us the data of the farmers? Like, oh yeah, 20,000 here. Give them the inputs, the credit. But in the ideal world is, before you share that data with Equity, you have to get consent. Because at the point when that data was collected, it was not meant for that purpose. That means then the cost of getting consent from all the farmers whose data you're going to share with the finance institution, introducing the cost, which was previously not catered for. Unlike all of us in the room, if today, let me say, Agrifin wanted to share all our photos, just like you signed a consent form, let me say we didn't sign, but they still wanted to share. They'll probably broadcast on either a platform or by SMS because you're all connected. So the cost of you giving consent will be very small. But for a smallholder farmer, you need to go visit them physically, have them sign, have them understand. So from there, the data, from 20,000, you're coming down to how many actually can give consent so that data is shared. Remember, you have the data. You have transaction data, probably for 3 cropping seasons, which is rich and is quality data because it's not, you're not interviewing the farmer. Someone is not telling you what they are producing. because they're accessing a service, they have to put the data is authentic. But for you to be able to share it, there is that cost that needs to be met. So there's that block already in the regulation. So that's one of the highlights of the partnership we're doing, and how data sharing is a bit tricky on the private sector side.
Thank you so much, Sila, for sharing that. And let's get a bit more into the tricky side of things, right? Because it's really great to hear about the value of these collaborations. And I think we can all agree. But let's talk to the challenges a bit more, and not to state what the challenges are, because I think we've heard them this morning, right? We've heard about, from the presentation from Srijit, but also from Mr. Paul Dong, about the challenges around ownership, revenue sharing models. How do we price data? How do we deal with that in data collaboration models? Regulations, all sorts of challenges that we've heard. So let's hear from you a little bit more on how you deal with these challenges, so that we get inspired as to no longer see them as challenges, but ways to overcome them. And let's talk a little bit more about the challenges around ownership and cost of data collection, data collaboration, starting with you, Albert Bogart. So in one of the examples that you shared, I'll leave it up to you to pick out an example that you find most appropriate to talk about. Who would own the data, and how do you deal with the cost of data collection and sharing? Is it something that you also share in your collaborations, or who takes up that responsibility?
Yeah, actually it's a great combination of two topics, ownership and costs, because in my opinion they go together. You can't expect from a buyer to make a lot of costs to collect data and then share that with their competitors. That's not realistic. It's not going to happen. On the other hand, let me give an example. I know a farmer cooperative in Nicaragua that is extremely successful in leveraging on ag fintech technology, and it's the most digitized cooperative I've ever seen. Why are they able to reap the benefits of that digitization? It is because they own the data, and they get a proportional share of benefits. So referring to the agricultural exchange example, there is that ownership of the farmer transaction data with the farmer organization. And if you look at the costs, it's a combination. It's shared, but it's really an ecosystem approach, depending on where you are going. If you're in India, it's a little bit easier than in Africa, for instance. Because of population density and lower costs and less traveling, etc. But in Africa, it's really an ecosystem approach where also donors, NGOs play their role in not supporting Rabobank or anyone else in their business propositions. It's really empowerment of the local organizations. And that's often also needed, especially if you also want to reach impact at certain groups.
Thank you for your reflection on that, and especially that it's not just a general approach, right? It's case and context dependent on how you go about it. Can I turn back to Zila, because you also mentioned the cost, right, of the collection. Any reflections from your end? Does it resonate with Albert just shared with us? Or how would you look at the ownership and cost of data collection and sharing of it?
All right, so in our case, the farmer owns the data, because ideally the farmer is the data subject. It's provided for first legally as them being the owner of the data, and we are processing because they're using the platform. Now, in terms of the cost, what we are trying to do in our partnership with Equity is to embed that cost in service delivery, not as a direct cost. For example, if a farmer is going, for you to go and just collect the data without embedding it with any other cost, it's quite expensive, because one, you're using intermediaries, in this case the agents, that you have to train for them to be able to collect quality data. But also to be able to, what we are trying to do to reduce the cost. After we try to standardize the data points that we are sharing with Equity. And at the point of every farmer accessing the service, those are some of the key data points that would want to collect directly. So what is working out right now is that we're embedding the cost in service delivery. For example, if a farmer wants inputs, at that point of the delivery, that's where some of the data points are collected. Not all, but still, I can't stress enough that it's still costly. Yeah, it's still costly, and to try and make a sustainable business model out of it.
Sort of good practices can be encouraged and enabled through data sharing models. But of course, there are limitations. For instance, you'll find you are required to have informed consent. So the person who is sharing the data or providing the data must know the reason why you're asking for that data. In your case, it's to facilitate credit underscoring. Maybe later on, you'll want them to consent to another use case, and that's at the cost to you. But also, there are principles around data minimization, data retention. So how long can you keep that data? Of course, that imposes some cost or some frictions on how you can use that data. But I think overall, given that issues around data protection with regards to personal data is embedded on it takes sort of a rights-based approach. I think it will be difficult to run away from the requirements of these provisions.
Thank you, Francis. And I like how you frame it that these regulations, we can see them as guidelines, right, to help us as to how to go about it rather than something to be scared of. Thank you. So in terms of some of the challenges or things we need to consider to make it a success, we've heard, right, the regulatory aspect, we've talked about ownership, consent of farmers, the cost aspect of it. Beryl, looking at you, is there anything that you feel is missing from this discussion? What would be some of the key principles for success to you in terms of data collaboration?
That's hard. It's hard because I'm thinking what else has not been covered, right? Maybe the beginning, where we are talking about how was that data collected, which is kind of covered, but the consent around it. But is it, the data set complete? In that, was it the correct identification number? Was it the correct telephone number? Was it the correct name? We know the challenges about when it comes to women. Is it the husband's cell phone number because they thought, okay, something else will happen? So if we are getting the data sets wrong from the word go, again, on the data privacy side, then there's an implication in the long run, right? Did the woman say she has half an acre while she has 1 acre because she doesn't understand that? So more of the garbage in, garbage out. But if we are getting the data sets regardless, if we get them wrong from the word go, then the implications in the future have a repercussion. So that is one. 2 will be the transparency about this is truly how much data sets an institution has. You're interested in financial data. These are the data sets you have, so that if somebody else wants to work with you, they know you've already collected that particular data set and you've almost cleaned it or perfected it, so that collaboration and innovations, people can partner much better. I know what you have. I trust you. But are we in the room honest enough to say these are the type of data sets I have, so that collaborations and partnerships are more in sync? It encourages innovations. Half the time we'll say, oh, I have 2 million data sets, until you sit down with someone and you look at it, then you cut it down by half, and then you realize I need this, but it is missing. That creates some repercussions. So I'm trying to think about what else has kind of not been covered.
No, it's really interesting because we were so focused on the actual collaboration, assuming we have the data right, but it's also thinking of the step before, the actual collection, and then we do that right. And I heard you mentioning women, right? Zila, if I can turn to you, knowing that there are vast differences in terms of digital literacy and access to resources for women. What would you say, how can we make sure women also benefit from data collaborations, or maybe are even included in the data collection itself as a first step? Can you speak to that side a little bit?
Thank you. So we first need to understand the environment where the women operate. When is the best time to collect data from them? When is the best time to involve them in the entire process? Who should involve them in the process? For example, when you're organizing a training, if you make that training, if you bring the women separately, you find that many women will come. They'll mobilize themselves, use the leadership, and they will come. When you make the training for both, you find that the men will dominate the trainings. So that is just one example. If you try and organize trainings, for example, in the mornings, many of them will come mid-morning, afternoon, because they prefer to first finish up with whatever work they had to do, then they come and attend to this one as secondary. So even in the process, in the design of interacting with the women, we put into consideration how understanding the user, just like in product development, you need to understand the actual person who is going to use the product. So also, if you want to involve, if we are involving them in the data collaboration, the data sharing, the data collection, then we need to understand their behavior and then design the product around it. For example, it's just collection and even the training, bring them together. You find more success when you use their female leaders and then you kind of just tailor the trainings to them alone and then they'll come. Secondly, the timing and also putting there like enabling environment. There are scenarios where we have had sensitization, marketing sessions in the communities where we actually encourage them to come with their babies. It's okay for you to come, but you need to understand, but also a lot of sensitization. Then lastly, it's about also involving, especially I'm talking about the rural women, not the ones who are a bit elite, but the rural women that we are trying to target, involving their spouses in why we are collecting the data, like kind of like a household thing, so that it does not bring any kind of conflict. For example, today if you own a mate, let me say you go to a household and then you find the land is not jointly owned, but it's for the household, but it's not the person signing on the land agreement is the husband. And then you're collecting data about the land and you're asking the woman, how many acres do you have? Maybe something like that. And then something that simple can bring a rift. So trying to design our initiatives around the practical environment where the women actually operate for success.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And before we finish up with the last set of questions, let me just talk a little bit more, or let's talk a little bit more still on the actual practicalities of data collaboration and how maybe AI could help us with this. Because this morning we heard Dr. William Ogalo from Google Research Kenya talk about AI and the potential benefits. Albert, what do you think the role AI plays or may play in data collaborations? Have you seen any of this happening in your examples or engagements?
Yeah, I think we should be very careful applying AI in the sharing of data. This, per definition, has to be transparent. We have one column of data and one column of users. You want to know exactly what are you sharing with which party and for how long. Using AI for that, I don't think that's a very good idea. So, but there are exceptions. If a farmer sends a picture of an infested crop, for instance, to a chatbot, and GPT-4 seems to be doing a good job. It seems to be beating agronomists nowadays. Of course, that is artificial intelligence, but it's very much, let's say, earmarked for a specific purpose. And in a way, it's also data sharing. So maybe that could be an exception. If GPT-4 outperforms an agronomist that is never present, for instance, maybe that's a good reason to do it. Of course, looking at all the satellite imagery, like the Google Earth presentation that we've seen, that's impossible without AI. But at least your AI will produce verifiable data output. From the satellites, and that you will use as input in a transparent way. At least that's still how it works. There's no big algorithm that decides the creditworthiness of a farmer based on 2,000 data points or whatever. That shouldn't be the case. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So as a final question to all of you, because I mean, we're all here in this room to learn a bit more about data collaborations and hopefully also walk out of the room and get into collaborative modus, right? So a question to all of you, what would you advise people in this room to consider when they start collaborating in data? If it can be just your top advice, maybe 1 or 2 sentences max, what is it that you advise people to do?
So I have 2 points. I wear 2 hats. So 1 hat, it's not perfect. The public sector is hard to work with, I admit. But let's listen to what they're asking us to do and collaborate better with the public sector. We all get to benefit. Calro has data. They are owning up to sharing. Let's try work with them. On the digital green side, we are currently working with extension officers and lead farmers on the ground using artificial intelligence, chatbots. And the content they're accessing, it's all advisory. The content they're accessing is research given to us by different institutions so that the extension officers don't have to wait 3-4 days if they have a problem. They're sorting their problems as we go. We are looking to collaborate with people who are willing to give us content that we can put on the chatbot so that the extension officers can benefit. This model is for extension officers and lead farmers, not directly to the farmers yet. So we are looking for collaborations on the AI side. Something unique, something we are willing to try.
So two things on my side. Even before we share the data, I think most of us already are sitting on large data sets. So the first thing will be just to free that data. If you're publishing any report, at least publish the underlying data, even with the codes for analysis and stuff like that, just a first step. And then now when it comes to actual sharing and collaboration, from a tech side, I think should try to use open systems to the extent possible. Somebody mentioned open APIs. Try to do a bit more multilateral using aggregators rather than bilateral agreements.
Okay, without repeating what my colleagues have already said, I think from a private sector point, data sharing needs to be mutually beneficial among the partners, starting with the person who's owning the data, whether it's a farmer, how does it benefit the farmer, how does it benefit the organizations that are collaborating. So whatever initiative we are putting together, if we are looking to share data, look at it to be mutually beneficial. Secondly, also setting standards for the data collection and also the sharing plus the compliance. So look at if I'm sharing data for financial inclusion, what data points, how am I going to share that data, which platforms am I going to use to share that data, so that it's set up front, but most important, make sure that it's mutually exclusive, for mutually beneficial for both, for the parties involved in the data sharing. It will make it very sustainable.
Thank you so much. Emmanuel, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Is there any questions that you have for our panelists?
Thanks for a very insightful discussion. I have a question for Francis with reference to some of the initiatives taken towards reducing costs of data acquisition. My name is Edward, a data scientist within NCBA Bank, more specifically working within the digital subsidiary of the bank, Loop DFS, supporting agriculture ecosystem from scoring perspective. However, when we get partners who are willing to provide us data for scoring from a credit perspective, by regulation, especially from CBK, we also require to own the customer, especially from a KYC perspective, have the image of the customer, have the ID, and probably the KRA PIN. Yeah? And more often than not, even if a partner has that data, you also required as a financial institution to prove that that's your customer. And it goes back to the same cycle, and probably you also have to incur some costs, irrespective of the fact that the partner you're engaging had more or less provided you the same data. Thank you.
That's a difficult question. I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer, but I'll make an attempt. Of course, when you are collecting that type of data that you've described, you're already in the territory of personal data. So, of course, there needs to be some protection around how that data will be used and even shared. I might be wrong, but I think that the law actually also has some requirements around acquisition of data. And it ties to the issue of data minimization and retention. So the person who had that data in the first instance and went to lengths to acquire it had some purpose behind that data collection. And I think that's the reason why then if then you have to onboard another partner to leverage the same data, you might be required to go through the same process of consent and to show the purpose for which you are proposing to do the data. In terms of the requirement to show that it's your customer, I think that just goes back to the issue of purpose limitation. I may not have answered your question correctly or accurately, but I think that's the rationale behind those requirements.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ikuya. I work with IDH. I have a question. I don't know who can help me. It's respect to last mile, data collection and how we can make it more real time, because most initiatives collect data once in a lifetime. The program ends and then the data is sitting somewhere in the data warehouse. Is there opportunity to do last mile delivery where actors, smallholder farmers, businesses can plug in and continue to provide real-time data for intelligence, for insights, and also for other, services? If you have experience, best practices that you can share, yeah. I don't know who can, help respond to this, but yeah, thanks.
Muthoni, do you want to answer that question? Because you are not paying attention and it is your baby. So Muthoni works for the Ministry of Agriculture, and please find her and talk with her about last mile data collection. Currently, with the support of World Bank, the Ministry of Agriculture is looking into how can they engage and estimate 15,000 youth, there's a criteria, of people who are ICT survey somehow, to collect initially they want to do it every month. At some point it's not realistic. Then in the next in a year, it will be almost every 2 months. And they will be going back to, they're given a data set. So if they come to me and I say I'm Beryl, they can find Beryl, and they are actually ward-based and then village-based. So it's somebody who the village will identify as their person, and they can be willing to give that data because they know the person, right? Then that data that is collected goes into the national database. Now the question has always remained, how do we access that data? But intentionally, the Kenya government is looking into how do they connect dynamic data. We are calling it dynamic data. So the 6 million will be static. We know it's 6 million farmers in Kenya, this is set. But every 2 months, can we know who now is planting maize, who now is doing coffee, what has changed, and then improve the data sets as we go. Please find Muthoni to explain more on how that is being done. And if you want to collaborate, she'll tell you where gaps have been identified and you can plug in.
So I want to say something on the same. So it's one thing to collect data, but it's another one to update the data and keep it alive. And one of the realistic things one of the most difficult things, yet the most effective, will be to have interconnected systems where the farmers are part. How does this work? Right now we have platforms where farmers have access to inputs. where farmers are trying to have access to information. They're trying to have access to finance. Just like us in the room here, every day, every second, we're updating our data on social media. And because we are part of the ecosystem of social media, how do we make it in such a way that the systems that are currently operating, especially on the private side, private sector side, are interconnected in that if there's a platform that is excellent at providing access to produce, it does not again, that is its expertise. How does it interconnect with a system that's expert at providing inputs? So that very same farmer who has gotten produce also can get inputs interconnected without us having to go back. It's expensive. Just like I said before, if it's a government initiative or IDH sponsored, World Bank sponsored, it's easy to start. But to sustain it, it's easy to get biodata and static data about a farmer. But where farmers are consistently changing patterns, behavior, today I'm growing tomatoes, tomorrow a neighbor tells me I've made money from pumpkin, I go to grow pumpkin. Then the next time I'm like, okay, no, I'm done selling from Kenya, I want to export to Europe. You get, and that's kind of, static data is easy, but data that consistently changes can only be collected sustainably if the systems are interconnected. If right now the farmers can't have access to smartphones, how do we get that USSD, SMS data? How do we get that whatever platform that a farmer is interacting with for it to be interconnected so that we don't keep going back to the same farmer, which causes, like I think is one of the presenters talked about it, fatigue. You can't come to me every time you want data for inputs, then tomorrow, okay, now my national ID. Then you get, but if the systems are interconnected, like it is right now for us with the tech bit, it's going to be an easier way for us to actually collect data and even share and be able to get consent.
Just very briefly, in our view, the ideal data source is zero cost or zero marginal cost. It's highly predictive and it has a high frequency. And there are two data sources that stand out. One is transactional data from output, whether it's market linkage through easy agric or inputs, and the other one is ERP systems. This afternoon there will be a presentation of eProd in the plenary, so I think it's worthwhile following that one and keeping this question in mind. The second one is remote sensing data. And that tells you nothing about the farmer, but it tells you a lot about the farm. And that's developing year by year and improving with higher resolution, spatial resolution, temporal resolution. So it's becoming more affordable. So those are the two data sources I would recommend looking at.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Akuya, for that last question. It almost triggered another panel discussion here. But really great to see the discussion. And I really hope that we leave this room continuing the conversation, because I think that's how we get the collaboration started or continued. Yeah, I hope you all leave this room feeling inspired that there are incentives to collaborate and that with the right measures taken, there is a business case for it, for value chain actors, but it can also benefit farmers as we've been hearing. And I'll leave it at that note and hand over back to Emmanuel to see how we wrap up the last bit of it.